Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. Again, it is I, producer JL, coming at you with another solo podcast, the summer edition, so to speak. This is kind of similar to how some of the radio hosts on, let's just say WFAN go on, summer vacation, and they have people filling in. Even though I am a regular on this podcast, it's been me for most of the summer. So, like I said, we hope to get the regular cast and crew back here soon enough. Summer's been very busy for a lot of us, but we are here still giving you, content for, the summer and just talking Rangers hockey, even though there hasn't really been much going on. So I've been more than happy to be able to fill the gap for everyone here. And I hope that everyone, including Rob, Becky, Dave, and the rest of the Blue Shirts, the Blue Seats blog crew are having a wonderful summer. Anyways, with that being said, this one isn't going to be too particularly long. There's not really much to speak about. My initial plan of doing a bit of a retrospective podcast outside of the last one that I did was kind of, I don't want to say derailed, but it's kind of, pertinent to really talk about the signing that took place the other day, and that is Ryan Lindgren. So we were talking about before about, Lindgren being up in the air and trying to figure out what exactly is he going to get from this team now. A lot of people were advocating that they could possibly trade him. A lot of people were advocating that they could probably find someone else to fill that spot. But the Rangers seemed kind of hell-bent, especially after the whole Jacob Trouba nonsense, that they were kind of trying to keep him around, So with that being said, Ryan Lindgren, basically avoided arbitration, and the Rangers and Lindgren came together on a one-year contract with a $4.5 million cap hit. So so while the Rangers wanted a shorter-term deal with some term, Lindgren wanted a longer deal with term, and they kind of ended up at sort of like a prove-it deal, 1 year, $4.5 million, which is kind of strange because it just really sticks out to me that they would actually agree to that. Lindgren has been a mainstay, and you figured he probably would have maybe have gotten a better contract elsewhere, but maybe the market didn't really formulate for him in that sense. But that's beside the point. But or the trade market, I mean, because maybe the Rangers were maybe trying to look to trade him somewhere, possibly. I don't have any sources on that. That's just kind of a guess. So Lindgren's back for another year. Obviously, that helps Adam Fox for, just for continuity purposes. And essentially, this kind of puts a wrap on the Rangers offseason. They really didn't do as much as they planned on doing, because I think the whole Jacob Trouba thing kind of really put a wrench into things. Now, just to touch on Lindgren quickly, Lindgren has been a warrior for this team, and he's been one of my favorite defensemen personally. I mean, I bought a jersey with his name on the back of it. He kind of seems to be that glue guy, and they play very well with him in the lineup. You can tell that there is like a missing gap in terms of just cohesiveness when he's not in the lineup. It's way different than Jacob Trouba not being in the lineup. The Rangers seemingly played better without Trouba in the lineup. I think they went 12-2 in his absence, but for some reason, when Lindgren isn't in the lineup, they just don't seem to play as well. And it's weird. As good as Adam Fox is, and I'm sure he could play with other defensemen, but Adam Fox seems to be very comfortable with Lindgren and really plays up to the type of player that he could be. Now, I don't doubt that Fox could possibly be good with somebody else. He's looked good with Keandre Miller and, to an extent, Eric Gustafsson at one point. But for some reason, it seems like that comfort level that he has with Lindgren really allows him to, really sort of be the defenseman that he can be, you know? I mean, hopefully the Army doesn't sue me for saying that. But so now the Rangers do a couple things, and Dave really did touch a lot on this on the blog. Says that they mitigated injury risk with a short-term deal, but now they're trying to see whether the risk is that if his subpar season last year was kind of a blip and not a trend, because after next season he will be an unrestricted free agent at 27. And so with Lindgren's 4.5 million cap hit, and with everybody signed, Rangers have about 1.5 left, 1.5 million left in cap space. So now, if the Rangers wanted to bring some people aboard, they would have to really sort of either move somebody or just kind of get one more person that would be able to fill in within, that salary rate. So now, the way the team currently looks as it is, at least on the defensive end, is you have Lindgren and Fox, of course. You're going to have Schneider and Miller, which were tremendous all throughout the playoffs. And just, when they got paired in the regular season. And then you're going to have a mix of Chad Ruedel, Jacob Trouba, Zach Jones, who I think will be starting Zach Jones, and then also potentially Matthew Robertson. So with Lindgren getting re-signed, you now have to think about your depth. Because if there's one thing we know about Ryan Lindgren, and he even sustained somewhat of an injury during the summer in the Beauty League game, is that he will get hurt. And there will be periods of time where Lindgren will miss substantial time on ice, whether he's going to be injured or he's on the bench or whatever. So now the Rangers have to essentially say, all right, well, what are we going to do in the case of having him there as Fox's D partner? Will Zach Jones get a spot with Fox up top? Is this Matthew Robertson's chance to come through? Is there somebody else? Is Chad Ruedel going to get more of an extended look, now that he's brought back into the fold? But the thing about Lindgren too is, like I said, is his injury, his injury woes. That's the biggest thing. We can say we've harped on it before. This isn't an uncommon theme. Everybody else and their mothers has harped on it before, and that's one of the reasons why I guess they decided to go with a 1-year deal. So now if you're the Rangers, what do you do? What exactly do you do? You try and find another defenseman with that 1.5 million cap space? Do you get somebody else in Hartford? Maybe, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head right now, but somebody else from Hartford to see if they can kind of fill that role. Because now, just looking at this type of contract, the Rangers don't seem too confident that Lindgren could really be a plausible option, because the Rangers always seem to be sure on what they want, and they will reward them with certain contracts, like they did with Fox and like they did with Lafreniere. And obviously Igor is going to come into that equation soon enough. I have no doubt that the Rangers are going to pay him some sort of money. I don't think it's going to be the ridiculous $12 million that's been floating around, but the Rangers seem to reward, the players that they want to keep around. Look at Adam Fox's contract, look at, Panarin's contract when Jeff Gordon was GM, So basically what I'm trying to get at is this. Lindgren, it's kind of a weird situation, because ideally you would want him to stay here as long as he possibly could. Adam Fox seemed, like I said before, Adam Fox seems to play well with him, but it's just those injuries. It just causes such a concern. And it's really hard, at least for this team, to have such a good defenseman get hurt so often and not have a stronger backup plan. Now, you could make the argument that maybe they missed the deal in getting Jacob Chikrin, because he probably would have been a decent Lindgren replacement. Chikrin is a solid defenseman in his own right, hasn't exactly been the good defenseman that we've all remembered from when he was with Arizona, because certainly Ottawa has not been a really good place for him or really any player to kind of develop. I mean, look at what happened with Alex DeBrincat. He was in Ottawa, was very underwhelming, gets traded to Detroit, and then all of a sudden has this renaissance. Now, obviously, the Brinket going back to Detroit, he's from there, so that obviously helped. But, you know, it just makes you think like, well, did the Rangers really miss out on a guy like Chikrin or even a guy like Scott Walker? Not to say that they're exactly like Lindgren, but maybe these guys could have possibly been replacements or maybe somebody that could have sustained a little bit more. The injuries are the main thing here. And clearly the Rangers have seen it, and that's the reason why they came to this sort of deal. And it seems like Lindgren's camp is also trying to take a gamble on himself to say, hey, I'm going to take this deal and then maybe go for a bigger contract when he fully becomes an unrestricted free agent. So this is essentially a prove it deal, just like it was with Capo Caco, and just like Alexis Lafreniere's contract was a prove it deal. And so far, we've had one player on a prove it deal able to step up to that task. Capo Caco hasn't necessarily done it yet. This is also a make or break for him, and it's now also make or break for Ryan Lindgren. The good thing, though, is that it keeps continuity in check, and even though it's a similar roster, they're not really running it back 100%. A lot of the guys are returning. Obviously, you're not going to trade Zibanejad, Kreider, Panarin, all those guys. That trade that the Florida Panthers are blessed with, the Rangers are not in the position to be in that. They don't have any sort of leverage, or they're not really. There isn't really much of a market for a trade like that this offseason. So you have to essentially run it back to a degree. Obviously, they added Riley Smith, and it seems as if for some of the other forward spots that have been vacated, obviously Sam Carrick is here now and replacing Barclay Goodrow, but now you take a look at, you have depth now. You have Capo Caco. Will he, make the next step? You have Brett Berard, who they're seemingly wanting to try and get into this lineup because they haven't traded him, and it seems that the more this newish regime comes in, they're really trying to emphasize 5-on-5 play, and Brett Berard brings just that. Obviously, you have Brennan Othman, who's also there as well. He's nothing to dismiss. So maybe this is going to be the time for them to transition some of these younger guys into some of these roles. So maybe the same thing applies for the defense. I might be jumping around a bit when it comes to this right now, but the Lindgren signing basically not only ends their offseason in a sense, but now it also basically confirms that the Rangers are really going to try and let some of these young guys try and take hold on roster spots. And honestly, that is a good thing because maybe there's going to be a couple of defensemen in the minors that could possibly come in and fill a role. You never know. Or maybe somebody comes in on a training camp invite, Berard, Othman, and maybe somebody else comes up. Maybe Adam Sikora finds his way here somehow. That's obviously probably not going to happen, but, or maybe it will, but who knows? Maybe he surprises in training camp. But with the Lindgren signing basically putting a bow on the offseason, this essentially reinforces many things, like the Rangers looking to try and get, the most out of Lindgren to see, if he's going to play well, but also reinforces the fact that New York is going to let these kids come up and try and take spots. And to that, I say very good, because now that means that and, obviously also Riley Smith is here, of course, he's definitely going to make a difference. And I'll get to that in a second. But, you create this sort of contest between the bottom six, because now your top six is basically full. You have Panarin, Vincent Trocheck, and Alexis Lafreniere. Your second line is going to have to be Chris Kreider, Mika Zibanejad, and Riley Smith. And maybe that line getting bumped to the second line allows Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider to be more productive because they've had a million different line mates over the last couple of years. The only line mates that I honestly can remember off the top of my head being somewhat productive on an extended scale would have been Frank Vetrano and Pavel Buchnevich. Capo Caco had strong possession numbers when Gerard Gallant was coach. Didn't really translate well somehow with Peter Laviolette. I don't understand that. Maybe it's Caco himself that's being too tentative. I don't know. But Caco is the perfect player for that line, and it hasn't worked out yet. So you need a contingency plan. There've been so many. Jack Roslovic, who I liked personally as a player, but as the playoffs went on, you began to see why he was not the guy for that line. Because I mean, and honestly, maybe even just for this team, and I'm not trying to make him a scapegoat, but Roslovic, you can tell, kind of got overburdened with a lot of the possession that the Panthers had. Strong skater, he has a good IQ, he's a good passer, and it would have been cool to maybe bring him back on some sort of, cheaper deal. Um, but, he clearly was not, at least for the playoffs. Regular season, he was fine. That line looked very good in the regular season. They were, cohesive enough. But once the playoffs came, they were separated many, many times, even getting separated for Philip Hedl, who's not playing his natural position for some reason. So, um, so with Jack Roslovic not being around and Riley Smith taking that spot, your top six is basically solidified. So now that basically leaves, you know, you have Will Cooley, Philip Hedl, and an opening. And then you have another opening on the fourth line, whether it's going to be Matt Rempe, Sam Carrick, Jimmy Vesey, and an extra. So there's going to be a lot of competition going on, and that's going to be good for this team, because then we'll be able to get people here who want to play. And obviously also to another, a full season of a healthy Filipino will also be key in all of this. So that's one. So in talking about the defense, like I said, it was set before, and they're going to have to prove themselves too. This team is still going to be very good. This team is going to be um, This team is going to be, they're not going to be a flash in the pan. They're probably not going to win the President's Trophy again. But to say that, obviously it's disappointing coming off of a Eastern Conference final and a President's Trophy winning season, where they were basically expected to at least go to the Cup final. But the Rangers will be right back at it next year. Riley Smith has come in, playoff performer. Is going to definitely add something that this team could have used, and we kind of hope that they did. I would assume that they probably looked into it, and Pittsburgh probably didn't want to do it in the moment because Pittsburgh was still in it. So why would you want to trade off an asset to a rival that you could potentially face in the first round? So all in all, this whole Lindgren situation kind of puts a bow on everything. And, there is obvious concerns, about him and his health. So there's that. So just as the summer goes along and football is just coming back, I'm recording this early in the morning on August 2nd. So you'll be getting this in a couple of hours. It's currently 2:04 a.m. and this will be released at around 5 in the morning, and you'll be getting it today, of course, or at least the day that I'm recording this, which is August 2nd. And so there really hasn't been much. And honestly, I think it's good for the most part. You know, um, Thinking about some of these other moves that other teams made, you know, it just kind of seems a lot of it was reactionary. And look, that's not to say that they're not, this team is perfect. They're not. They're not perfect at all. There is no perfect team. Even the teams that win the Stanley Cup have flaws. A lot of it is skill, and a lot of it's also luck. The Rangers didn't have much luck going towards the end. The Florida Panthers made their destiny. It happens. It's sports. It's part of the process, you know. But just looking at this team and looking at what they have, they're first of all they're too good to just not be in the they not be in the in the discussions again for next year. If they somehow manage to drop an egg, well, that's a different story, you know. And although Chris Drury has been, you know, questionable on certain things, he's done more than enough to put this team in the right position. And this, to win. He's been very cutthroat with a lot of things he needed to be cutthroat with. Like Barclay Goodrow taking up 3 and change. He was phenomenal in the playoffs, but you can't just keep a guy who you're overpaying. And look, personally, I thought the contract was fine, but COVID-19 came and messed up a lot of things, and it really ruined the value of the cap going up. And it it really, I think teams were expecting it to go up more. When that signing was done, you know, he was signed after the fracas in 2021. It was expected the cap was going to go up a lot, but the NHL kind of put a halt on that, and that didn't just hurt the Rangers; it hurt other teams. So, I can't see this team not doing well next year. Excuse me. I can't see them not doing well. No, I just can't. And with Lindgren coming back, there's a familiarity to that. I just can't see them not playing well next year. Of course, like I've said before, and we've said on this podcast, and I've probably said it multiple times, and I've said it privately and publicly. Of course, it's frustrating. Like you put all this. It's last season was such a heavy emotional investment, and it's not just a sentiment that I've thought about because I'm the same. I feel the same way. I was exhausted. I was actually kind of relieved a little bit after the loss because it's like, you can only take so much. It was such a long and arduous playoff and mixed with just the regular season just having its ups and downs, and with the injuries that were occurring and the shift in lines and players, especially for Hedel, Kako, Truba, amongst others. It was just such an exhausting season, and those playoffs, oh my gosh, took years off my life. And I'm sure it took years off of the lives of everyone else that were watching, and what made it even crazier for me was that I was making videos about it. So that definitely added to it. It was fun. Don't get me wrong. I love playoff hockey, especially when the Rangers are involved. It kind of cuts into the baseball season, and it allows for, something else to take my attention away, especially if the Mets sucked, which they did for the first like month and a half. But overall, I see this team doing well. And I think Lindgren's going to be fine. Of course, he's probably going to get hurt, but I see this team definitely making it to the playoffs next year. And, who says that they won't add strong at the deadline? If there's one thing I've known Chris Drury to do lately, is that he's been able to sort of kind of, I don't want to say walk back, but essentially fix the things that he could have done differently the year prior. Like with the way he did this year's deadline, granted, some people would think it was overwhelming, but I thought the trades were fine and they were honestly needed. Alexander Wennberg was a solid hockey player. Jack Roslovic was a player that this team needed in terms of speed. Chad Ruhwedel was the perfect complement for a defense that needed depth. Unfortunately, he didn't get much playing time in the playoffs, which I think he should have, because I think that would have saved them a little bit. But the trades were fine, and it added to a team that was already good. I think, yeah, obviously it's disappointing when your main guys don't do much, and especially. But then again, the Florida Panthers were shutting everybody down. This wasn't just limited to the New York Rangers. The Florida Panthers were able to put a pin on Connor McDavid for so long until they decided to storm back. So, well, I'm not gonna sit here and make excuses about it. You also have just to understand that they faced a team that was essentially destined to win the cup with the way they played. And could we have asked for better performances from those guys? Absolutely. But it's not to say that, these guys aren't any good. And that's just the vibe that I get. And this is not me excusing or like dismissing anybody's opinion, because I'm just as upset as everybody else. I want these guys to perform. But at the end of the day, what's done is done. And you look at the team as it's currently constructed with Riley Smith, with Chad Ruhwedel, with these young kids coming in. Now, I'll just touch on that real quick. So, a lot of people want these kids to come up and do well. The big thing that a lot of these contenders that constantly are like, I always used to wonder back in the day, how come the Rangers don't just get guys coming up from the system to automatically come in? Like, look at Tampa Bay. They were able to, Nikita Kucherov is a perfect example, with, the Norfolk Admirals and all those players that they had, Tyler Johnson, Vladislav Nemesnikov, Alex Killorn, Cedric Paquette, all those guys who came up from the Admirals with John Cooper. The Rangers never really had something like that. And obviously the markets are different. Tampa Bay is a lot different than New York. Florida is a lot different than New York, but now we're finally installing something that allows us to bring in players who can make an immediate impact, but also serve as long-term options so that they don't have to go and, overpay for guys in the bottom six. I always said, and this is why I was so happy about Edstrom. There's another one. Adam Edstrom can also make a difference on this team next year too. But this is why I've said it publicly, and I've said it to everyone in the chat, and everyone that knows me knows I've preached this before, is that all these successful teams that end up winning Stanley Cups don't usually massively overpay their fourth line. And you began to see that becoming an issue with Barclay Goodrow when the cap didn't go up. So that was an issue because his play did not reflect the money that he was making. But if you look at I like to use the Boston Bruins as an example with a guy like Milan Lucic, who, yeah, he was skilled, but he was playing that grit game, and just that whole team was just built properly from guys that they developed. Tampa Bay, same thing, from guys that they developed. So at some point we have to say to ourselves as fans, all right, well, let's see what these kids got. And I think it's entirely possible with the way this team is constructed, they can 100% do well with those guys earning time. It worked for Will Cooley, but that's the type of player that he is, maybe it'll work for Othman in some capacity. Maybe Brett Berard comes in and does it. As you can tell, I'm really high on Berard. I like what he does. He's a good skater. He seems very tenacious. Same with Adam Sikora. But anyways, so if the Rangers want to become similar to what Tampa or Florida does, then one of these years they're just going to have to take a leap, and that's what I think they're trying to do this year. So granted, they may not win the President's Trophy, but they're still going to be a playoff contender regardless, especially with Igor Shesterkin back there. And I've barely touched on Igor over this summer. His contract's up at the end of the year. He's going to be somebody the team has to pay soon. And with the cap going up significantly this offseason, it'll probably go up next year too. He should become priority number one. While I don't necessarily agree that a goalie tying up a big portion of your cap is needed, but for the Rangers it just might be, because I don't see anyone else in the system really taking that mantle unless they trade for somebody. But Igor is one of the big reasons why this team is going to be really good, especially going in the future. I was very pro Lundqvist contract at the time. Obviously $8 million isn't the same now as it was before. $8 million, he turned that down in a heartbeat. But with the Florida Panthers winning the Stanley Cup and building the team the right way, it shows that you can build a team with a $10 million goaltender. Igor Shesterkin is way better than Sergei Bobrovsky, and Bobrovsky won a Stanley Cup. Bobrovsky's one of the better goaltenders in the league. He's got the hardware to show for it now. He didn't, he started rough, but was able to rebound strongly and really take hold of something that he should have done a long time ago with the Panthers. And he got a huge contract, which we were all laughing at because we're like, why are they giving him that much money? But, when you go to a state like Florida, there's no income tax or no state tax. 10 mil is going straight to his pocket. And it worked out for the Panthers. I mean, they almost ended up trading him at one point during all this. So I think Igor is going to probably end up with about 11 or 12. And honestly, if the cap goes up and the Rangers have the space, why not? Jacob Trouba will more than likely be gone. Capo Caco might get traded if he stays the same. So that frees up a little more cap. So why not? Why not? I'm all for that. But anyways, so like I said, this is going to be a shorter podcast. Now I'm just kind of rambling at this point because it's, pretty late. But I felt that we needed to touch on the Lindgren situation once and for all because now this basically sums up the whole offseason, like I've said. So now we just basically have to wait. Good thing there's football and the baseball. This is the cool thing, and then I'll end with this. This is the cool thing about just watching multiple sports. If you don't listen, if you don't watch multiple sports and you're listening to this somehow, um, it helps because as someone who used to only watch baseball at one point, or heavily rather, at baseball at one point in my life, back when I was younger, it was always a bit depressing just to kind of wait for spring training to come. But as I got older and I started watching the Rangers and the Jets, which, you know, one out of those two teams are good, it really helped, you know, go through the seasons. Like hockey is great going through the late fall and winter and going into those early, January, February months of the year. It's great. It keeps you occupied. Football is like the bridge in between baseball and hockey for me. So if you get a chance, and you're listening to this somehow in whatever ether this is, if you're listening to this and you only watch one sport, I highly suggest you watch another. If you're interested. And I'm beginning to also really get more invested in the NBA as well, so that'll also help. But I just say that because this is the Rangers, they're done. So what else is there to look at? Unless they make a major trade, there's probably nothing going to happen between now and September or when training camp begins. And then also obviously there's a prospect showcase that I saw that just happened recently. And then obviously Gabe Perreault has been absolutely killing it lately. So that's also a plus. And we could sit here and talk about Gabe Perreault all we want. Hopefully we can get Will Wright, contributor to the blog, to come on at some point to talk again about, Gabe Perreault and his progression, just generally, so there really is not going to be much going on, you know. So with that being said, so that pretty much puts a wrap on pretty much any major moves the Rangers made. And we can sit here and pontificate about the roster. We can sit here and talk about, who's going to do this and what's going to do that. But really, at this point, we just kind of have to sit and wait and see what they do. See what they do when training camp starts and how they deploy their youth and how they utilize them and, what they do to include them into the fold. What do they do with Matt Rempe? How are they going to utilize him? What has been his growth over the summer? Is Mika Zibanejad going to come back and go back to his old self? Will Artemi Panarin have another strong Hart Trophy style year? Is Igor Shesterkin going to have a solid season all around and not have 1 month where he was absolutely awful? All that stuff's going to come in due time. But you can sit here and think about it as much as you can, but you just kind of have to wait. We can sit and pontificate all we want. I like that word, by the way. But yeah. So if anything else happens between then and there, we're going to have it for you. But obviously, we're going to try and release a pod for you every week, and that goes into the next thing I wanted to talk about is just essentially, going a little heavier on the nostalgia that I've been doing since I've joined the blog. I know that I've done a lot of those types of pieces, but that's something that I really like to do. And I'm trying to think about what the next piece is in terms of going back. It's also tied into video. So maybe the next one will be Brendan Shanahan. Maybe the next one will be Martin St. Louis. There's a lot going on in my life right now, and it's, not that these videos are hard to make, they're just very time consuming. So they're still going to come out, of course. But I always like to, at least when it's a slow time like this too, I love to put these things out because it kind of just makes you think about it and gets you more excited for hockey. I am a good video editor, but I'm not a, one to, I know how to do it, but I don't have the time to really put all the fancy effects and edits into that. Not yet. Maybe if things kind of ease up, I'll start getting back into those again. Um, but as I mentioned at the start of the summer, is that there's going to be more looking back in time for the Rangers, and I think the next one, will be either between Brendan Shanahan, Martin St. Louis, or maybe even a guy like Peter Nedved. It's kind of fun to sit here and go back into old games and look at the old uniforms, look at the old garden, you know. And once I really touch on a lot of the stuff from at least from like 94 all the way until, you know, not too long ago, I guess. That's not the right way to say it, but from like 2004 all the way up to like 2017 or something like that. Then I'm going to start going and looking for footage from, the 70s, and maybe 80s. There are games online that show that, but I don't think they'll be as in depth as they would be of the ones from like the late 80s, early 90s, and stuff like that. But all that stuff's going to be coming at you, and I thank Dave for not only giving me the opportunity to do this, because broadcasting is my specialty. It's what I went to school for. That's what I currently do as a job, so to speak. Broadcast adjacent. More of an editor than on air, even though I would love to do more on air. I thank Dave for also giving me the opportunity to write about this stuff. And, I'm not trying to slam anybody. I was part of a previous Rangers publication. I'm not going to say their name. I also did produce their podcast, but a lot of opportunities didn't present itself. And that's one of the reasons why I left. So I'm glad that Dave was able to give me the opportunity to do that. And I really hope that you guys appreciate not only the stuff that I put up, but the stuff that we just put out as a site in general. Dave puts he's a very busy man, but Dave puts a lot of work into some of these posts. And, I read up on them, and they're really good, really insightful, really level-headed. And the same thing with the rest of the Blue Sea Live crew, especially with this podcast. I love the interaction that I get with that. Not only I get, but we get, rather. It's the important part, especially when the whole crew is here and we fish out for questions. That the questions are some of my favorite parts of the podcast, because you guys come in with some really good questions. We have some very engaging discussion. We try to keep it as level-headed as possible, and then sometimes you guys really give us some funny stuff to work with too, especially Mr. Colleen Camp, for one. But you guys keep it interesting. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for checking us out. I think I can speak for the blog, for Dave, and for everyone. I wish I could just rattle off everybody's name that's on the blog, but there's so many that I'm just going to include us all together into one. It's just great. And I'm glad that the retrospectives and the classic articles get traction, and I'm glad you guys read them, and I'm glad you guys listen to us here. So with that being said, that's going to put a wrap. It's getting pretty late. I am very tired. I do have to be up at work in the morning. By the time you're listening to this, it'll be, maybe you listen to it at 5 a.m. when it comes out, or it'll be the afternoon. But either way, that is a wrap for us here. I know I said that a couple times, but check us out on X. I still call it Twitter. We're at Blue Seats Live. You can follow any one of us. We're not that hard to find. Please continue to read the blog and continue to give us a listen on this podcast. We're looking to continue to grow. We're looking to expand, and that's wouldn't be possible without you. I'm beginning to sound like Mr. Rogers now. Anyways, until next week, have a wonderful evening, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and let's go Rangers.